Can you kind of break down the difference between maybe the roles of a recording engineer that's doing the tracking, a producer, the mixing engineer, and the mastering? So maybe those four, I guess, kind of walk through the process for our listeners, educate
Yeah,
them.
it's also important for musicians because there's a lot of times they are not quite sure what's going on. Like you record them and then they're like, okay, let's go to mastering. Like, hold on there.
Well, you don't
Kind of
want it
skip this step.
mixed? Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
hard to master this right now. But so the recording engineer is the person that sets up the mics and plug them in and chooses which mics, which inputs, which you know, preamps, compressors, all of that before it gets recorded. So that's the recording engineer that makes sure that that live sound that is being played gets recorded up to that spot. And sometimes a producer does that too. There is producers that are very hands-on, and there's some that literally just tell you, you do what you do. So that's why I said it's sometimes hard to distinguish because I've met producers that tell you straight up, I want this on the kick, this on the snare, and then you kind of follow it and then you do it your way, like still the positioning and everything and getting the sounds in. So that is the recording process. Once it is recorded, you can still edit, like that's the editing phase technically in between. If the vocals have to be tuned, if sections have to be cleaned up, like sometimes it's you have to edit the drums, or just especially for hard music, the drums are generally edited, and then you organize things with the producer too. Like sometimes they want a certain section cut out, so you do that, send it to the mixer. The mixer gets the files, generally all just consolidated. He doesn't see what has been edited and cut and whatnot. And ideally, it's all labeled because that's a recording engineer's work. And they take that work, generally not having the producer necessarily right in the same room, but that can happen. And they basically put the sounds level wise, EQ wise in a mix that is ideally you get it like very widespread and have some depth and you can hear every element of it to a certain degree. I mean, obviously every music genre changes a bit, but that's what the mixing engineer does. He basically takes all the stems, like all the single tracks that have been recorded,
All
and
the
makes a stereo file.
instruments.
Exactly. And it turns it into a stereo file, or if you have 5.1, into a 5.1 file, but it's one continuous file that has all the instruments in it. So basically condenses all the files into one file. And then the mastering engineer is the one that takes it. And it's kind of like the finishing touch. You make it louder, so it's at the same volume that is nowadays acceptable for radio and streaming. Things are recorded way quieter. Now, if the mixing engineer sends it to you loud, that's because they don't want you to come back and say it's quiet, because a lot of musicians don't really know that that happens after. But then put it at a certain volume, and they also take out frequencies that are kind of in the way. They make sure that it's nice and polished and sounds ready to be released. And they also add all of the metadata. So they put into the song the artist, the name, the RSSC code, the UPC, all of these things. So when you basically put the CD in, back when there were CDs, you see all the information come up. That's the mastering engineer. And if you want an album, they lay it up for you too. So you can choose to either have the 2 seconds in between each track, or you can have them flow into each other. The mastering engineer would be the person to put that in.
They could do the hidden tracks in there somewhere.
Yeah, all of that. They basically make the finished product ready to be duplicated. Yeah.
Okay, so just a very quick recap. So you have the tracking where you're recording all the instruments,
Mm-hmm.
then the mixing takes all those instruments and makes it sound like one song, and then the mastering takes all those individual songs and makes it sound like an album. And
Yeah.
then you would go out and purchase that after manufacturing, I
Exactly.
suppose.
And if there's different mixers on an album, the mastering engineer would also have to make sure they sound from the same source as if they're from the same album. So they might have to take a little bit of low end off on the one song, but add a little high end here just to make it all seem like one product. If there's different mixers. Generally, if it's one mixer, it will sound very homogeneous. So it's not like way off, And then the producer, generally it happens from the very beginning before tracking until the very end. So the producer would, there's different kinds of producers, obviously, but usually help writing and arrange the songs. In some cases, even decide on which musicians to hire extra if you need some extra instruments. He'd be there during the tracking phase to make sure the performance is right. He's the one generally picking the tracks and saying, that take was better than this one, but maybe on the end, the one before was better, and then splice those together. So the comping generally is done by the producer or decided by the producer. He's the one comping the vocals. So you have different takes of vocals that have been sung, and he takes the best words or phrases from the best takes so that it's the best product to his ear. And then aside from that, he is the one saying yes to the mix. Or, well, he can decide that with the band or the label, whoever is really involved, but generally the producer is the one agreeing to a mix being done or wanting changes. And then the same for mastering. So he's the one basically making sure, yep, that's the right direction. Maybe, turn this instrument a bit up or not. So sometimes the producer is also the one deciding where to go with which personnel, who's tracking, who's mixing. But then sometimes it's the band that decides it. So that can be different every time.